Starting with the top story for the evening, amidst an ongoing tussle with the central government, the RBI held a meeting today with 18 of its board members. On the agenda were key issues like easing rules for weak banks, providing liquidity to the non-bank finance companies, as well as establishing a new capital framework for the RBI. The markets watched with bated breath as reports surfaced before the meeting that the RBI Governor Urjit Patel may announce his resignation. Now, some key takeaways from the meeting that we believe is still going on include that the RBI wants the government to commit more to the state-run banks. The RBI is also open to the review of the state-run banks' corrective action plan. In fact, following the meeting, benchmark indices were trading nearly 1% higher. The government officials have strongly urged the RBI to ease lending and capital rules for banks, and the RBI has been urged to let the government use more of its surplus reserves to boost the economy. Now, these are only takeaways. The meeting is still not concluded. The government is in fact asking the central bank to hand over a part of its surplus reserves to put it to a more productive use. Well, according to wire agency Reuters, an expert panel may be set up to work out the appropriate level of contingency reserves for the RBI, effectively kicking the question down the road. The RBI has surplus reserves of 3.6 lakh crore rupees, which the government says can be used for development, but the RBI's side is that these reserves are essential for possible emergencies. Now, the friction between the RBI and the central government began a month ago when the RBI Deputy Governor Viral Acharya angered by pushing for RBI autonomy and warned against the wrath of the markets. Now, just before the beginning of this month, it emerged that the centre had written 3 letters over the past month to the central bank under Section 7 of the RBI Act to initiate consultations on 12 issues, including the PCA framework and the RBI's economic capital framework, to facilitate the transfer of surplus reserves. But later the government had said that it respects the RBI's autonomy as defined in the Act. The next development is the meeting that has been ongoing since this morning.
Legal war between the two parties, but as a professional, our reaction is that RBI is an independent regulator and it is supposed to carry out its responsibility as a regulator, and I'm quite confident that the RBI will do its job, which is supposed to be done by the RBI as a regulator. The government may like to persuade the RBI to carry out certain changes in the monetary policy. Those issues and those suggestions the government will be considered by the RBI, and if it finds that these are acceptable and workable, they will accept it. Otherwise, of course, they will not. That's a way and the regulator works, and that's a professional body are supposed to work.
Different organs of the government, उनका अपना responsibilities है. So government is more responsible for the growth of the economy, for the real sector development. The RBI is more responsible for inflation targeting and for financial stability. But it is not that these two sectors are completely independent of each other. They are interdependent, and one has to take the help of the other also. So what I will say is both these two critical organs of the government, they should try to reconcile their differences.
All right, well, to help us understand some aspects of the friction going on between the government as well as the RBI, I'm being joined by Mr. Rahul Chandar. He's the MD and CEO of LiveFin, which is a supply chain-focused NBFC. Mr. Chandar, thank you for joining us on the broadcast, and a very warm welcome to you on India Ahead. Now, my first question is that for the sake of our viewers, if you can help us understand, first of all, what is this tussle that's between the government and the RBI when it comes to NBFC liquidity?
The NBFCs have been facing a liquidity crunch, especially after the ILFS crisis broke out. Primarily, I think it is more to do with sentiments. A lot of the larger NBFCs fund longer-term assets or longer-term projects, but have been using shorter-term, either deposits or shorter-term borrowing to fund that, basically to play on the arbitrage, the pricing that is available. And the ILFS crisis has brought that to the fore, and that has created a so-called liquidity problem for the NBFCs. Though from whatever we are hearing, it is not that the liquidity is short. It is, I think, a lack of confidence in the sector, which has been shaken due to the happenings at ILFS.
Okay, so you believe that there's a different issue involved, but is it being dubbed as an issue of liquidity?
As far as the NBFC is concerned, it is a liquidity issue because they're not able to get funding for the business that they want to do. However, I think there is sufficient liquidity available.
Okay.
It is just a lack of confidence that is there at the moment in terms of what action the RBI is going to take and how that will impact the NBFCs going forward. People are conserving whatever liquidity they have.
Right.
You know, they have CP payments coming up, they have rollovers coming up. They just don't want to be caught on the wrong foot on defaulting, so they are holding back in terms of lending. Okay. And that is the real problem.
But so you agree with the RBI side? The RBI believes that there is no need for a special window for liquidity because it will show that there is an intense problem, a serious problem where there isn't one. So do you agree with that?
I think RBI needs to be very clear on letting, explaining to banks and not trying to paint every NBFC with the same brush. An NBFC which is doing short-term supply chain business like what we do, comparing that to an NBFC which does infrastructure funding like ILFS or the housing finance sector, they are very, very different businesses. However, every NBFC is looked at with the same parameters. And, so there has to be possibly a reclassification, if I may use that word, in trying to distinguish between the different businesses. Long-term business versus short-term business is a very, very different thing.
Right. All right. Well, let's talk about the center here, because the center is worried that a credit squeeze will affect small businesses. Now, the timing is especially important for them, considering this is right ahead of the 2019 elections. Is there a basis to this concern that the center has?
It is, because if you see over the last couple of years, 3 years, the funding to MSMEs has been going down. NBFCs have been playing a larger role in trying to reach out to the MSMEs and fund their needs, which today, given the so-called liquidity issue that we are seeing, is drying up the funds for them, and hence their ability to fund the MSMEs. So from the government's viewpoint, yes, there is a lack of credit that is available to MSMEs, whereas the issue is not really that there is no liquidity, it is just that it is not reaching the NBFCs, especially the smaller NBFCs, or I would say the NBFCs which do shorter term lending to MSMEs, because these are largely trade fundings to MSMEs, these are not largely capital fundings. So that is, I think, the worry for the government is correct.
All right. Now, a report by the ratings agency Moody's says that there is, in fact, a sharp slowdown in credit availability in India. So on that note, it is basically echoing the sentiment which the center is echoing. Yet the RBI has made its stand very clear. So do you believe that what Moody's is saying is right? And based on that, what is your expectation from the RBI board meeting?
It is correct. The funding has been going down to the MSME sector. There is absolutely no doubt about it. There was it was a negative territory a couple of years ago. It has picked up, but it is not at the same level it was at 2013-14, which does impact the economy as a whole, because this is the sector which is the second largest employer after the agricultural sector. It contributes almost 40% of the GDP. So if there is a shortage of funding to that sector, it definitely has an impact.
Right. And, at India Ahead, we very often and almost every day we talk about solutions and what can be done. So, in your opinion, you believe that all NBFCs are being painted with a broad brush.
Yes.
That may not be the case, and the RBI seems very stern on its stand. So, what, according to you, in an ideal world, what would be the solution? The meeting has still not ended, so we don't know what the RBI says. But according to you, what would be the solution to this particular problem of, a liquidity crunch and lack of credit availability?
Like I said, I don't think it's a liquidity crunch which is there in the market. I think it is for the RBI as the regulator for both banks and NBFCs to clarify what actions they are planning to take as far as the NBFC sector is concerned. I think it's very difficult to look at declassifying or reclassifying different NBFCs in the current structure. That's a longer term solution. But I think there has to be a very clear directive from the RBI in terms of what kind of ALM policies. The asset liability management is an issue, which is what has actually caused the problem at ILFS.
Okay.
So I think if they come out with clear guidelines on what the ALM has to be, I'm not saying that there are no guidelines, there are guidelines, but it has to be separated out for the different kind of NBFCs, possibly. That might be the shorter term solution, which then gives banks a very clear understanding on how they should examine different types of NBFCs.
Right. Okay.
It is a critical sector as far as the financial markets are concerned. They have the ability to go down to a level which banks do find difficult.
Right.
Most of the MSMEs are more cash flow driven. They require a different kind of credit, and I think those are the kind of understandings that need to come in.
All right, and just one last question away from that tangent is because you also have experience with the banking industry. I just want to ask you that there is also another thorny issue between the RBI and the centre is the use of surplus reserves, and the RBI believes that it should be kept for emergencies, but the centre believes that it should be used for economic growth, which once again could have a time angle to it, right, considering that we are just behind the elections. Whose side are you on?
I think it's difficult to take sides. I think the issue is not that the government wants RBI to release surplus funds. That is, I think every central bank requires to have certain reserves exactly for the purpose that they are saying. I think the debate is on the quantum of that funds. Is 14-15% surplus funds good enough, or the current level of, I guess it's about 26-27%?
Yeah.
Is that really required? India has seen shocks, or the world has seen shocks. So it's a question that needs to be debated at what the right level is. And I don't think the government is really pushing to say that release the funds so that they can do growth given the elections coming up. I think it is more in terms of determining what the right level of reserves will be.
All right. All right. Well, I would like to thank Mr. Rahul Chandar. He's the MD and CEO of LiveFin, which is a supply chain focused NBFC, for joining us on the broadcast. The bottom line here remains that the RBI's marathon meeting is still not ended. We still are a few hours away from when the meeting ends, and we know whether or not the RBI and the centre has been able to call it truce. But considering that the issues don't really look black and white and that there is a lot of subjectivity involved, how the RBI tackles it and how the centre response to it is still an issue that we'll probably have more to say tomorrow. On that note, it's time for a short break. We'll be back in just a moment. Stay tuned.